Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's episode by episode review of Better Call Saul Season 5. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Better Call Saul, one season at a time. In this episode, I cover all the episodes of Season 5 of Better Call Saul. So, as of the time of this recording, I am now up to the most recent, last aired season of Better Call Saul, even though I know there is still one season remaining. This is the most recent one, but it's been over a year since I've seen it, so it wasn't fresh in my mind, so rewatching it did help me to re-experience. Also, it helped me to put it in the context of the greater show, watching all 5 seasons once a month in a row like this, because when I first saw season 5, it had been years since I'd seen the previous season, because each season is more than 1 year apart when they air. It's more like a year and a half. So it had been a long time since I'd seen season 1 and 2, so I didn't really remember how it fit into the greater context of the show, or how it compared to the other seasons in terms of quality. Now, as far as that goes, I was unwilling or unable to sort of make the determination of how this season compared with previous seasons, because it had been so long since I've seen them. However, I haven't seen all of the thus far aired 5 seasons in a row. I am now able to say with certainty that this is in fact my favorite season of Better Call Saul, and I think this is the best so far. I am hoping, fingers crossed, that season 6 will be even better if it follows the same model of Breaking Bad. That would be the case, but it's not the same show, so I can't make that, take that as a given, but I am very hopeful that season 6 will in fact become the best season. Will be even better than this season. Not just based off of precedent from Breaking Bad, but also based off of the particular storyline that this show and this season in particular has set up for. It looks like they set up for greatness. So, in that matter, why do I think this is the best season? Well, first of all, I do think that this is the fastest moving season. Now, I talked about the slow pace of Better Call Saul and how I don't mind that slow pace. In fact, in a lot of examples, the slow pace of the show works to its benefit because it explores the characters more. However, there have been cases, usually around mid-season, and particularly in season 2, which I think was the worst offender of this, where the show moved too slow to the point where it didn't benefit the characters or build the characters. It was just unnecessary for most part, felt like indulgence rather than actually fleshing out the characters or fleshing out the story. It was just like indulgent in cinematography. Oh, look at these cool shots, or look at this isn't artistic or whatnot, rather than servicing the story. And I think I don't think the show never ever got like terrible at this, to be clear. Like, I liked each and every season of the show. I gave each and every season a positive rating. But I do think that season 2 had the most of this indulgence and slow pace, and it moved at too slow of the pace, to the point where I even said, and I stand by this, I don't even think season 2 should have existed. I think the story that was told in season 2 and 3 should have been combined into one larger season. But, I'm sticking by that opinion. But season 5 definitely was the fastest pacing season. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best season. I mean, look at Game of Thrones for an example of that, because their fastest paced season was by far the worst, because it moved way too fast and it lost all of the characterizations and tiny intricacies and deep dive looks that made that show so great. Whereas this show managed to get faster but keep all of that. In fact, I would, compared to other shows, I wouldn't call this season fast paced. I would call it probably normal pacing. It's like your average pace show. It just seems fast compared to the previous seasons of Better Call Saul, which were more slowly paced, which, again, not a bad thing. Now, if you're a bit confused on what I mean by pacing, I remember when I was a teenager, I had a friend who tried to convince me there was no such thing as fast or slow pace. It's like, oh, it's just, he had no understanding of it. He was more of a musician. He had no understanding of how movies, fiction, and short story and storytellings work. What I mean by pacing is, and particularly how it's involves this season, is at the start of the season, the point we have at the start of the season seems very far removed from the point we have at the end of the season. It seems like the settings where the characters are at, how they relate to each other, is very different from point A to point B. Now, as I said, I actually think that is true of a normal season of a normal good television show. That will be the case. However, I think earlier seasons of Better Call Saul, the characters did move and evolve, but not that much. The situation from season 2, for example, from episode 1 of season 2, from episode 10 of season 2, was only slightly different. Like, they did grow and things did change, but not that much. It was more or less the same overall situation that the characters were in. I mean, they've learned some things, they evolved a bit, but they're overall like very similar to where they started. Whereas I feel this season, season 5, it's a very different situation from where we begin. Where we begin, it felt a lot more like season 4, and by the time we get to the end of season 5, it felt like a completely different scenario than what was presented in season 4. And I do think that's a really great thing, because it was, as I said, it was not too fast. Like, it was done in a way that felt natural, that explored the characters more, where you bought this evolution of how you got from a totally different point A to a totally different point B. And that's great storytelling to me. To me, that's a lot more interesting. Now, it's not just the pacing of why I think this is the best season. It's also the consistency of quality, which, of course, I think is tied into pacing, obviously, because I think some of the more slower paced episodes, I keep picking on season 2. There were some in season 1 and 3, to be fair, and season 4. Not so much season 4, which I think season 4 was the second best season, but more, especially season 2. But even season 3 and 1 had their episodes that were really slowly paced, and those tend to be my least favorite, because they don't really push the story forward. Not just that they don't explore the characters enough. Maybe there's some slow-paced episodes that do great character explorations, and that I love, that I find interesting. I don't actually define that as the slow-paced filler, because it's not filler because it's exploring the characters, but the ones that deal with, how did, Saul Goodman quitting, or Jimmy McGill, sorry, you're still Jimmy McGill at this stage, quitting Davis and Maine and wearing different suits and pissing off, what's-his-face, Cliff. Like that, it was an entertaining story. I won't say it's not entertaining. That's why I say this show's never bad. It's always good. But it doesn't do much in terms of developing his character or pushing the story forward. Whereas I feel pretty much all the episodes in season 5 do this. Pretty much all the episodes in season 5 have either pushed the story forward in a natural and interesting way, or they explore the characters more in a natural and interesting way, or both. And I think season 5 has some of the best episodes, and then I don't think there is absolutely no episode of season 5 that I would call filler, or even close to filler. Where I think all the previous seasons, except for 4, I can't remember 4 if they had a filler episode or not, but definitely the first 3, probably 2 in season 2, definitely had filler episodes. Which, and again, how I'm defining filler is, it doesn't add to the characters or stories whatsoever, and you can pretty much, other than like a few like beats, like which could have easily been added to other episodes, you could easily skip that episode and not miss anything. And so, yeah, and there was nothing like that here. I felt like every episode was important. Now, there was a storyline this season that I felt was less than interesting, and I didn't quite buy that as Mike's storyline towards the beginning of the season of being depressed and out, and I didn't quite buy how Gus was able to pull him out of this. So that is the one aspect of the story of the season that didn't really work for me. But that's it wasn't that terrible as I think it was a terrible storyline. It was okay. I just thought it was the weaker of everything in the season, but it still moved at a reasonable pace. And then compared to all the other storylines this season that developed, especially how they developed a Jimmy, or I could call him Saul now, I'm getting the names mixed up, but anyway, he's kind of Jimmy still. But anyway, Saul and Kim's relationship this season, every storyline they had about that really worked. It added to the story, it explored them more, especially when you got it tied into the Lalo stuff, and having Jimmy, it really explored how Saul Goodman, you'll have to excuse me if I go back and forth between names, but anyway, it explored how Saul Goodman becomes involved in this criminal underworld, which, as I said, is something I think the show actually should have gotten to sooner. But I don't really regret doing it here because they do it so well. And that's the other important thing about Season 5, is that all the worlds are starting to collide now. And which is, I think, will happen even more so in Season 6. Will be stuck in this unified story. And what I mean by that is, and I talked about this in previous seasons, and this really bothered me in Season 1 when it first aired, they first started doing it. But then in Season 2 and 3, it basically became the norm. Where the show wasn't about one story, it was kind of about 2 or 3. I would say 2, even though there were like 3 or 4 storylines going at the same time. Some of them were related, but there were 2 particular, joint storylines, shall I say, that were completely unrelated to each other. So what I'm saying is, you had the Jimmy and Kim stuff, and that could branch off into several storylines. It could branch off to Howard or Chuck, or Kim doing her own thing, Jimmy doing their own thing, but they were all related, so I would join them together as like one storyline. And then you had the Mike and Nacho and Gus stuff, and again, you could sometimes they're joined together, sometimes not, sometimes they're unrelated, sometimes they're completely together. Oh, and Hector, the Salamancas and all that, they have their own storyline, but that's the other storyline. And for the most part, these, especially in Season 2 and 3, these storylines were rigid and separate, and never the twain shall meet. Like, every once in a while, Jimmy and Mike would hang out together, and they would work together, and so they would help each other out on their storyline. But other than that, and I don't think that's really enough, they were really 2 separate things. And at first, that was really off-putting to me when Season 1 came out, but I kind of got used to it, and I felt that it did work for the show later on, and I do appreciate it. I don't think it tanked the show. I still love the previous seasons, even though they had that format, but I like it so much better when in this season, where these 2 storylines that remained separate ever since the end of Season 1 finally are joining back together in a more significant and important way. Like, they started merging in Season 4, but I think here is where they really collide. And I love that, actually. And so it's blurring to one storyline, which I would imagine, I haven't seen it yet, but I would imagine Season 6 is even more so like that. Which is another thing that has me excited for Season 6. So what I mean by that is, because we had the crime storyline with Mike and Gus and the Salamancas is pretty much merged entirely when Saul Goodman takes on Lalo as a client. So he is now directly involved in that storyline. And then you get more scenes with him and Mike having to deal with specific things having to do with the Saul storyline, and then you have Kim also interaction with the storyline when stuff, because Saul is so directly involved in what's going on with Lalo, so all the stuff that's going on with Gus trying to kill Lalo directly affects Kim, who at first these characters were very far removed, and what one did had absolutely nothing to do with the other, and now they're all starting to merge and everything is being combined, and I absolutely love that. I love that the way the show was handled. In fact, I will go a step further to saying, like, I didn't mind the fact that these two storylines were divided in previous seasons, to say I actually love it. I actually think it makes this season better that it was such a slow build, that they took the time to develop each one separately, and now they're finally merging them together, which I loved. Anyway, that's enough of the preamble. Let me now jump into the specific episodes of Season 5. Let's start with Episode 1, Magic Man. Now, this, as I said, this felt like a Season 4 episode, which is good. I think that's a good thing. I like Season 4, because this is the episode that immediately follows Season 4, and I love how it is, instead of immediately changing the tone like some shows do, which I found off-putting, it keeps that tone and slowly moves away from it into the tone that will be Season 5. And so here we see, what I mean by that specifically, how this has a Season 4 tone, is it deals with Saul Goodman being the cell phone guy, because at this stage he really still is, and that felt like a very Season 4 thing, but that's, as I said, that's great that they slowly transition, because this is showing, and it works in universe as well, because this is a transition from Saul being the cell phone guy to being the criminal lawyer, and enacting his plan to use his same clientele that he used to sell phones to transition to becoming their lawyer. And I think it's in this episode, you have the theme of Kim, where he suggests to her the 50% off thing. Kim's like, well, no, that's a bad idea. It's not like encouraging people to go out and commit crimes. He's like, oh, yeah, you're right. When you're right, it's a bad idea. So he took a different tact, and he, sold people the last of his cell phones and used that as an opportunity to sell them on being his lawyer. However, when he ran out of cell phones, no one seemed interested in listening to his pitch, so then he fell back and resorted to his 50% off pitch, which he had already rejected. So it shows that, that he's willing to listen to Kim to an extent, but if he needs it, to do the wrong thing, he'll do it if that's what he needs to do to get by, to get ahead. Also, I love, Huel in this episode. Huel's always great, but the way, Saul's like, oh, he calls me Magic Man. Oh, and Huel kind of sarcastically, okay, Magic Man. I love Huel. He's absolutely amazing. And then on the other side, before I move over to the crime side, there's also the thing with Kim, where the scene we get at the end of the episode, which I love, I thought it was an amazing scene, where she's doing her pro bono work, which is where her heart is, and she's trying to help this guy, and gave him a 5-month deal, and he's totally not listening to her. He wants to take it to trial, which she knows for a fact will give him a way worse result, and that he's lucky to have this deal. And so when he goes, she tells this to Saul, he agrees, like, oh my god, this guy's being a putz. And so Saul, in his mind, wants to trick him into taking the deal. So he comes up with this plot to pretend to be the DA and all that. And Kim's like, no, I'm not going to lie to my clients. I'm not going to trick them. That goes against everything. But I think Saul, he's trying to understand where Kim's coming from, because they have done schemes in the past. And most recently, towards the end of season 5, they schemed these banks into, registration bodies. I can't remember exactly, but they schemed to allow her client Mercer Verde to have a bigger branch. And so from his perspective, it's like, oh, so it's okay to scheme like just to get a bigger bank, but if we scheme here, we're actually doing this guy a favor because we're making sure that he takes the better deal for him, which will be better for him, better for his kids, better for his family. So from Saul's perspective, this is using his powers for good. And that's what he even says to Kim, because Kim mentioned before, after they did the Mercer Verde thing, that they should only use their powers for good. In his mind, this absolutely fit that criteria, so he was confused on why Kim wouldn't go along with it. But from Kim's perspective, that felt disingenuous to her clients, and this pro bono work she's doing to help people, and she thinks that tricking them is goes against that mindset, so she gets very upset, and when Saul keeps pushing it, she eventually lays down the law, yells at him, and is like, no, we're absolutely not doing this. And that's finally when Saul takes the hint and backs off. But then ironically, Kim goes to her client and does that same trick anyway. She just, because the client saw her arguing with Saul, so she used that. So she didn't even need him to play his part. She was able to take Saul's scheme and use it herself, but she never tells him about it. And in fact, afterwards, usually in the past, when we see her do these schemes, we see that it makes her very excited. She usually gets, when Saul's around, she gets sexually excited with him, and it makes, endears him towards her more, and that she likes doing these kind of schemes. But this time, we see that she is devastated, that it makes her ill by doing this scheme, because she is compromising her morals. She's doing the one thing, and I think she was being genuine when she was upset with Saul for suggesting tricking her own clients. But I think after he left and she had a few moments to think, she realized that he was right, that this would result in the best result for her client. So if she really wanted to help her client, then tricking him like this would be the best way to help him. But she didn't like it, so this kind of turns her off this scheming side, so that will sour her relationship, and that's why she never shared it with him, because she doesn't want him to know that he was right, because that would lead him to want to do it more. And so it sours their relationship for the next couple episodes, which I love. Because I think the way they portrayed when the relationship goes sour is very realistic. Anyway, we then get the other storyline where Lalo's obsessed with finding Michael or Ziegler, and he keeps going on and on about it, and finally Gus comes up with some BS, has a meeting with Juan Bolsa, and he comes up with this BS excuse to why he had German construction workers. And of course, Juan Bolsa completely buys it, but of course Lalo's smarter than that and doesn't buy it for a second, and he's actually correct to do so. And even though Juan tries to warn him off of going after Gus and tells him to keep the peace, obviously Lalo has no intention of doing so, because he goes to Hector and immediately tries to find out ways to get back at him. So it ups the stakes. We also get a really interesting scene with Mike, who's still devastated over having to kill Ziegler, and it's obvious to this to Gus, and Gus tries to. He sees Mike's worth. He sees that he would be a really powerful asset for him to have on his team, but of course at the moment Mike is pissed off with Gus, and so in that moment where Gus tries to explain, look, it's okay, we're gonna compensate his wife and it's all taken care of, and Mike's like, oh, you're gonna compensate her? And Gus can tell that Mike is getting really pissed off at him, so he says, I would choose your next words very carefully. So Gus still likes Mike. He likes Mike. He still values him as a businessman. He knows that he's a powerful asset that would only help his business and his endeavors a lot more, but of course he can't tolerate open insurrection or open anger, so he gives him that warning. And of course, coming from Gus, it's very serious. In fact, Ironically, it's similar to warnings that Mike himself has given in the past. Like, for example, when Nacho held his gun, almost pulled a gun on him. He's like, I'm going to need you to take that hand off your hip right now. And so it's very similar to that in Gus Restraint, but of course Mike is kind of a different person right in this scene because he's more grief-stricken and something that will be explored more in the season. So that was a great moment as well. So yeah, I did enjoy this episode a lot, but it's mainly just like set up for the season. The next episode we get is called 50% Off, which of course builds off of Saul saying he'd give 50% off, and the episode even starts with a flashback to the previous episode when he said that, and then we see like these two goofballs who are drug addicts who are meth heads who go out and wreak all this mayhem, and it ties into the other storyline because these meth heads, of course, get their meth from the Salamancas, or the Salamancas operation, I should say, and so it introduces us to a specific operation that will become important in a couple episodes. Anyway. And I remember saying this when I first reviewed this episode. I don't buy this. I don't buy that these two goofballs would actually go off and commit all these crimes just because the lawyer offered 50% off. Because it seems like, and I know that's the story trying to tell us that Kim's warning is coming to effect, where she warned that this might motivate people to commit more crimes, and so it's showing that's exactly what happened. But I actually don't buy it would happen that way. I mean, maybe it would make them be more careless and take more of a risk, but not like openly go out and cause all this havoc and mayhem, which is obviously going to get them arrested. Because I think overall, as they're acting like it's giving them a free pass to do whatever they want because they get 50% off, but 50% off, you still end up in jail, and you still have to pay a lawyer, which, as we find out later on, is still a lot of money. Although, I have no doubt that Saul is inflating his price in order to take 50% off of that. I think his ultimate 50% off price is probably close to his actual real price. And of course, these idiots would be too stupid to recognize a scam like that. But I still don't buy that they would go out and do all this shit just because a lawyer offered them 50% off. That seems a bit weird to me. But it was a fun sequence. I will say that. But then the rest of the episode is very interesting because we get the stuff with Crazy 8 getting arrested. Yeah. And because, this is also the scene where Gus threatens, he just kidnaps Nacho in the middle of the night and threatens to kill his father. I don't know if it was this episode, it might have been the previous one, but, I get these mixed up sometimes. But anyway, that's still looming over Nacho, and that was such an intense scene when Gus had, Nacho in the car and had his goon walk in and just say hello to his father, where the threat was very clearly implied, and not just like, what do you want to do? What do you want me to do? And Gus made it clear because Nacho said that, Lalo doesn't tell him anything, so he can't do anything. So Gus is like, you have to earn his trust. And so that leads into this, when Crazy 8 gets arrested and all of their drugs are still in the apartments, is just about to be raided from the police. Nacho takes this as an opportunity to earn Lalo's trust. Now, he does something extremely risky. He, climbs on another roof and jumps over, which in itself is risky. And it's actually quite amazing that he managed to pull it off. And, of course, that's what impressed Lalo. Lalo was convinced that Nacho was going to get arrested or, fall off the roof. But I buy it, and it makes a lot of sense because Nacho is that motivated. Like, his father's life is on the line, so that's all he's thinking of, I'm sure, when he's trying this extremely risky maneuver that I absolutely need to impress Lalo. It's like life or death for his own father that he impresses Lalo. And so he's willing to risk his own life and his own freedom in order to accomplish it, and it pays off for him. And that was an intense scene, one that I really loved. Also, I know this is kind of the previous episode too, but I like Saul's interaction with Bill Oakley. I remembered his name this time, the other prosecutor who we've seen throughout the show, who I love. I think he's the best comic relief. I love that they keep bringing him back. And I think it was the previous episode when they had, like, Saul had his film students dress up as reporters and put on the show for him and like accost him. But it was this episode where, where he sees Saul and he's like, what, am I gonna be on candid camera again? I love that guy. But Saul wants to make all these fast deals, and so he gets that other prosecutor, the one who we saw prosecuted Huel in the previous season, who's a really tough one, and he tries to get her to work out the deals very fast, but she sees right through him and knows that he just wants more turnaround so he can make more money. She's like, I'm not going to help you make more money. But so he arranges like for the elevator to break down when he just so happens to be in the elevator with her so he can do it. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that she didn't see through that, but I think that she just is not really aware of what he's capable of. She knows that he's sleazy, but he didn't, not really, maybe didn't know that he would be willing to go that far. Yeah. But anyway, this is we also start to see Mike, lose his temper. He goes crazy. I think, this is the episode he yells at his daughter, which is it's hard to watch. Not saying that I don't completely buy it. I think it's great characterization, but I just hate seeing Mike go down that path. But it does make sense that he would. And it's either this episode or the next one, not sure, but he also yells at the bartender for the Sydney postcard sign telling him to take it down. Now, this is, again, a benefit of watching both seasons back to back, because now I get the reference. When I first saw this episode, like, I knew it had something to do with Ziegler, but I think I had to have someone explain to me that in the previous episode, Ziegler explained that his father helped construct the Sydney Opera House, because I thought, well, he's German. What does that have to do with the Sydney Opera House? But I forgot about that backstory. Anyway, and I also think this is the episode where Mike gets, like, accosted by this gang and he kicks their ass, which we saw in the trailer is like a badass moment, but really it's just him being reckless. So again, this is another decent episode, another good episode. Maybe, nothing amazing, but, good episode. So then we get into the next episode, which is called The Guy for This. Oh yeah, it builds off of the end of the previous episode where Nacho picked up Saul Goodman because, of course, Crazy 8 got arrested and they want to employ him as a lawyer. And so the episode starts. This is the episode starts with, when I remember I talked about pretentious, artsy stuff that's just done to indulge rather than enhance the story. This episode actually has a scene like that where we see a bunch of ants crawling over the ice cream that Saul had to drop on the ground when he was went with Nacho. And I don't think this ruins the episode. I think it's still a great episode, and it doesn't affect the season at all. It's still an amazing season, but the scene itself, I think, is one of the biggest examples of pretentious indulgence. It had nothing to do with anything. It was a complete waste of time. I was like, oh, isn't this cool? We get to see all these ants in close vision. And it's supposed to be, isn't it? It's a metaphor for, and they even call back to it at the end of the episode. It's a metaphor about how great this is from one person. And I'm like, that's pretentious. I didn't like it, but I remember when I first reviewed this episode, I went on about this and I got all these thumbs down. Oh, how dare you say this episode pretentious? But it is. I'm sorry, I'm not going to back down on that one, but it's just the one scene. So it's fine. Like, as I said, it doesn't hurt the episode overall. It's still a great episode because then we get to see Saul actually confronted by Lalo, and we start to get this interaction, which is an amazing relationship. And I love how it starts out where Saul's extremely reluctant to get involved with this. And I love at first he's like afraid because his previous interactions with Nacho were not pleasant. Nacho was constantly threatening his life. So for Nacho to pick him up, of course, he's thinking, oh my God, he's going to try to kill me. And so he's like, I know what this is about. And he brings up stuff with, Nacho. But in fact, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. And it's more about, and it gives you a nice callback to the second episode of the entire show, the very first season, of him convincing Tuco not to kill those two guys who insulted his grandmother. And so that, Lalo hearing about that is what inspired him to hire Saul, because if he can talk Tuco down from killing someone, then he's a very persuasive guy. And I think how he says to him in his interactions, like, oh, you love to talk. Like, I think he says that as a compliment. He can see how persuasive and just unrelentless that Saul is with trying to convince people to do what he wants. And so that's exactly what he wants to employ. And so he hires Saul for Crazy 8, but not to get him off the charges, but to use that in order to manipulate the DEA to go after Gus, in order to hurt Gus. So he uses in his plot because he can't outright hurt Gus, because Juan Bosa warned him not to, although Juan becomes smart of it eventually anyway. So he tries to do something more on the sly. So he gets Saul to come in and convince Crazy 8 to feed the DEA not false information, actually true information, but it's true information about Gus's operations. So he wants to hurt Gus's operation specifically and avoid his own operation. And I like the interactions between Saul and Crazy 8. I think they really work. Now, of course, bearing the lead here, the big thing is that we get, for the first time in Better Call Saul, we get Hank Schrader finally making his triumphant return, and Gomez. Both these characters, of course, spoilers, died at the end of Breaking Bad, but this is a prequel, so we can bring them back just like we brought Gus back. And so they picked up, the writers, the actors, picked up Hank exactly. I mean, this character is not like, I think some of these characters maybe even Saul himself behave, well, though they could say that's because it's the early version of him, but the way they behave doesn't always completely line up with how they behaved in Breaking Bad. But with Hank, this is they nailed it. This is exactly and his relationship with Gomez, and it was interesting, and the jokes he would say is very much in his wheelhouse. And so those scenes, of course, were also really great as well. And so but Nacho, of course, is a spy for Gus, and so is able to give him the heads up that this is what Lalo's plan is. But Gus very smartly decides not to interfere with Lalo's plan, because to do so would tip their hand that they have an informant. And it's not that he's worried about Nacho's well-being, because obviously he doesn't give a shit about that, but he's worried about his pipeline, his spy, and so he doesn't want to throw that off. And I do believe, am I? No, I think I might be wrong. No, I'm wrong. I think this is the episode where Mike, I don't know what Mike's doing. No, I think this is the one he yelled at his daughter, but I just already talked about it in the previous episode. Anyway, so I really like this episode. I really love seeing Saul and Lalo meet for the first time. Also this episode is also when we see Kim. We get the introduction to her storyline with the grumpy old man who refuses to leave his house. And it's fun because Kim's with her pro bono clients, and Mercer Vader keeps trying to call her, but she's like, Well, this is why I joined Schweikart and Oakley, or whatever they're called. I'm sure I said that wrong. But with that law firm, that's why she joined them, and so she wouldn't have to deal with that kind of shit. So she would have all these associates. So she kept trying to call them, kept trying to say, oh, this associate can handle it. Don't worry, this associate can handle it. But if Kevin himself calls her and is like, no, I need you. You're the best. You're my lawyer specifically. I want you to handle this. And that right there has kind of pissed her off. And this, I think that was initially what sours her the most towards Kevin the Mercer Verder, because they're really, how dare you just fuck with me like this. And of course Rich has to convince her, like, look, they're the bread and butter, they're what's keeping the lights on, so if he wants you to do it, you do it. So she has to go drive all the way out and deal with this cranky old man. And at first, when he refuses to cooperate, she like yells at him and tells him that he's being infantile, and walks off. But then later we see how this is really eating her up inside, and she actually can sympathize with them, and then so she tries to go over there and convince him, like, all these better houses that he can buy and all this stuff that he could do, tries to help him. But of course he's very stubborn and refuses her help, which is a great way to start this storyline. So yeah, I did really like this episode. Alright, so then we get into the next episode, which is Namaste. So, yeah, I'm trying to... oh, yeah, I forgot to mention the whole thing with Howard. That had been a recurring storyline throughout the first couple of episodes, and of course became more important for this episode because that's where the episode gets its name, because Howard had offered Jimmy or Saul, offered him a job at HHM, which of course back in the day was what Jimmy McGill always wanted. But of course he's not Jimmy McGill anymore, and he tries to keep saying that whenever he calls him Jimmy. He's like Saul, because he is Saul. He's Saul Goodman now. He's a different person. He does not care about joining HHM. But more than that, he's kind of insulted by Howard's offer, and then Howard calls him again, trying to, what'd you think of the offer or whatever. So we see the episode opens with Saul having all this, going to a pawn shop and having, not a pawn shop, a secondhand shop, and having all these items and tossing them around, and you have no idea what's going on, but you find out that it's that he wants to find something to throw at Howard's car in order to smash it. And then we find he decides on bowling balls and throws a bunch of bowling balls to smash Howard's car, which has the license plate of Namaste, which is where the episode comes in. But also now you see Kim starting to get really irritated with Kevin, because she tries again. She's feeling empathy for this guy who is getting his house removed because of some legal loophole, and just because this big bank wants to build a call center, even though there's other places where they could very easily build a call center. So she tries to go down that route, look, why don't you go to this other thing, we could do it just as easily. But Kevin refuses to do it out of principle, because he's like, I'm not going to be scared off by this guy. So in her mind, he's being an asshole. And I think that's a very correct perspective to have. And so she's starting to get even more sour towards him, more pissed off about him having this particular attitude. So she hires Saul. And I love the scene where she goes to the courtroom with Saul, putting on a stunt of having this client saying, the witness in the stand saying, do you recognize my client sitting right here next to me? And it's like, yes, I absolutely do. And he keeps asking him over and over again, yes, that's the guy. It's like, we're just surprised that's not even him, that my client's actually back here. That was a great moment. And it's great that Kim actually saw that, and he was impressed that she saw that. And so she hires him to defend Ackard, I think is that guy's name, who refuses to leave his house, Mr. Ackard. And of course, Ackard's a curmudgeon. Of course, he didn't even want a lawyer, so Saul has to convince him to hire him. So I love the way he does it by, showing him. He's like, "Oh, you got to look at my proposal," and he, takes a piece of paper and it's like, "What do you see?" It's like, it's a guy having intercourse with a horse. He's like, "Yes, imagine me as that man, and the horse is mercenary because that's what I want to do to them. I hate them." And that's what, and credit to Saul, he knew exactly how to win this guy over because this guy didn't want like a legal, normal lawyer who would just do legalese and advise that he take the deal or whatever. Instead, he made it clear, no, I am out to fucking get these people. And I love how when Kim asks how he convinced him to take him on as a lawyer, he was like, "Oh, visual aids." Which I love. So this is the episode where Mike tries to push his way back into the family after, pissing off his granddaughter. But of course, his daughter-in-law doesn't want him around because he's still grumpy. She says, there's something wrong with you. And she's right. There totally is. And so he's kind of spiraling out of control to the point where he ends up going back to the gang that he beat up with the intense purpose of getting his ass kicked. And he gets more than his ass kicked. He gets stabbed, so his life is completely threatened because of his downward behavior. So he's really at his lowest low. So that was a good episode too. I also appreciated that. So then we get into the next episode, which is called the Dedicato El Max. Dedicato A Max, sorry. There's not L as A. But anyway, Dedicado, I think it's pronounced. But anyway, doubting myself. But anyway, so in this episode, it takes off with Mike waking up in Mexico. And he knows that it was Gus that took him there. And at first he's very grumpy about it and tries to walk away. But the doctor, who we've seen in previous episode, he originally appeared in Breaking Bad, who's Gus's doctor, convinces him to go back to the town. It's like, "Look, I'm just hired to save your life. Cool, so are you going to let me do that?" And he's like, "All right, fine, whatever." And he still tries to call Gus and figure out what's going on. Gus doesn't really answer. It doesn't give him any information other than he's trying to save his life. And so Mike feels like he's being manipulated because he knows how to manipulate people. So he knows what Gus's deal is. And so he's getting all pissed off, but eventually he warms up to the people there and starts to recover a bit. And I do believe it is the same episode that we get the resolution to the storyline, where Gus finally comes by and tells him that, "Look, you know where this path that you're on, you know where it leads." And he's like, "Oh, so what? So you think me working for a drug dealer is going to be any better?" And it's like, "You're no different. Are you going to tell me you're different than the Salamancas?" He's like, "Come on, you've seen the Salamancas. You know that I'm different." Which I don't know. There's a good argument to be made either way with that. Because yes, Gus is definitely different than the Salamancas. Is he better? I don't know. One could say that he's more calculated and more ruthless. But he's definitely, he's more objective. It's all about business for him. Where Salamancas, they take things personally. It's all about, "Oh, don't fuck with me." And they're more sort of rowdy about how they go about things and just openly violent, whereas Gus is more about precision violence. So Gus is more like a surgeon, where the Salamancas more like sledgehammer worker. So there's a difference, but does that make him necessarily better than the Salamancas? Well, it seems like he does convince Mike that that's the case, which I can see that. especially because Mike has seen that Hector was completely disregarding, had no regard for innocent bystanders, whereas Gus is shown to have a regard, but that had less to do with worrying about their well-being and more to do with wanting to keep things more tidy and not be so obvious about things, the surgical part of things. But the part about it, I mentioned at the top of my video, I didn't necessarily buy that Gus was able to talk him out of this or talk him down. And the part about it that didn't really fit for me is that Gus brings up revenge, and apparently that's what sells Mike to, completely turn his life around and work for Gus. I don't know, because I guess Mike has a slight stake in, because he hated what Hector did by Hector killed an innocent civilian because of what Mike did, and he felt guilty about it. That's why he wanted to kill Hector. So he has a slight stake in getting revenge of the Salamancas, but it doesn't seem to me that would be enough to sell them. Now, you could also look at it in more of an abstract term, that Mike just understands revenge in general, and this would go back to getting revenge on the men who killed his son, which is something that that he did, so he could understand that Gus is doing the same thing, trying to get revenge on someone, the Salamancas for killing someone that he loved. And of course, it is a dedicated El Max is dedicated to Max, which I believe was the his partner that Salamanca killed, Hector Salamanca. So that was a nice touch too, but I still don't quite buy. I mean, I can kind of buy it a little bit, which is why I don't think it's a terrible storyline, but I don't know. I feel like it does feel like his change it was too drastic of a change. Like if they toned it down with how suicidal he was, maybe I would buy he would come out of it by that. But because he was so far down, for him to return to normal and be completely devoted to Gus, seems like they needed something a little bit more than just some vague talk about revenge. I don't know. That's just what I'm thinking. Anyway, we also get stuff with Jimmy and Kim scheming to, to help the, I forgot his name already. Ackerman? Yeah, Ackerman, the dude whose house is getting evicted. And we get a lot of funny, fun scenes with Jimmy pulling all these stunts or Saul, I should say, but whatever, of Saul pulling all these stunts to stop the construction workers from taking down his house. Like, oh, there's radiation, or oh, there's some architectural findings, or oh, this is the wrong house, and just like, that was fun. I like that, and it was also great seeing that curmudgeon old man participated in how much he enjoyed doing it himself. And so it seems like he was really glad that he took Saul Goodman on as a lawyer, is exactly the kind of person that he wanted. But eventually we find that all these delaying tactics are just that, delaying tactics. And it just made Kevin even more steadfast in refusing to back down. And it just made him more determined to take this house over. So then they pretty much have to admit defeat. And we also got that nice scene. I love that scene where Saul was, with Kim in their apartment, and he was getting her to do an impersonation of Kevin. And she was like, "Whoa!" It showed how much fun they were having with it. But eventually it came to the point where Saul's like, okay, that's it. There's nothing more to do. We pretty much have to call it quits, because the only other option is to go into really deep, dark territory, and you don't want to do that. And of course, Kim was like, well, what if I do want to do that? And so Saul's like, look, if we do that, we're going to have to go after Kevin. We have to disgrace him. It's going to get dirty. And so you don't want to do that. And something about this scene makes me feel like this is Saul manipulating Kim a little bit, because the way he phrases is like, nah, you don't want to do it. Because if we've seen anything through con men, through TV and stuff, is that the best con is you convince that your mark, you make your mark convinced it's their idea and not yours. and that you don't want anything to do with it. And it really seemed to me that that's what Saul was doing here. That he really wanted to go after Kevin. He really wanted to do dirty work, but he knew that Kim would be against it, so he actually is playing her a little bit by saying, no, you don't want to do that. No, it's going to get disgusting. You definitely don't want to do that. It's kind of like that's his way of pushing her more to want to do it. Which makes what happens next even more devastating. So it was a great way to end the episode. So yeah, so this is a good episode too. So then we get into the next episode, Wexler versus Goodman. And so then we see that Saul is coming up with an intense plan to really disgrace Kevin. Oh, I think it was actually the previous episode where he hired the private investigator because he tried to get Mike, but Mike's like not available, being a dick because he's in Mexico. So we got that guy who appeared in season 1, dude who played Simon on The Walking Dead, and he was hilarious. And he was like, "Oh, let's kill him," and he's overzealous. But he was able to get them some useful information that Saul was able to use in this episode to come up with all these schemes to get strike at Kevin specifically, and they made this video that disgraced his father and slurred his name, and then they had the fact that his the emblem, that the symbol that he uses for Mercer Verde was taken from a painting or a photo that actually didn't belong to him. It was actually copyrighted by someone else. And so he's attacking him on that, man. So he's coming up with all these schemes. You see him with the film students, like filming all the commercials that to really go after Kevin. And then you see Kim shows up and tells Saul to pump the brakes and just stop everything. And the reason, of course, is because Rich, who is a smart cookie, kind of thinks it's a bit convenient that Kim urged Mercer Vader to leave Ackerman alone, and when they refused to do so, all of a sudden her boyfriend is defending Ackerman very staunchly. So, and I think that is a strong determination to have. Of course, Kim gets really pissed off and yells at Rich over this and saying, "What are you accusing me of?" But I think she's upset most of all because she knows that he's right. And he actually is smart, and he can see through her, and I think that scares the shit out of her. And that's why she calls for Saul to call the whole thing off. Let's call the whole thing off. But of course, Saul is committed 100%. Now, I do believe that when Kim first asks him to call it off, that he does intend to do so. He does intend to honor her. And he sends the film students home and wraps everything up. But I think the more he sits with it and the more he stews with it, he wants to do it so badly just because he loves doing shit like this, that he convinces himself that it's for Kim's own good, which is total horseshit. He convinces himself that Kim's just scared because she doesn't want to be caught out by Rich, which is definitely part of it, but it's not the whole story. I think she could also see that what she's doing is it's not something that she should be doing, like personally attacking Kevin in such a way. Whatever differences that she has with him. But Saul convinces himself that if he does it on his own after Kim told him to stop, then that removes, that gives her plausible deniability. That removes Rich's suspicion that he's not going to be suspicious of her because it'll be obvious that she's pissed at him. And he even uses that as an excuse at the end of the episode. He's like, that anger is real, and that's real anger, so he's never going to, he's not going to believe you are in on it because you weren't in on it. But that's, as accurate as that may be, it's still just an excuse for Saul to do the stunt that he wanted to do, which of course was show him all the commercials that smear his name and threaten him, go after him in such a personal way, which of course works, and he's able to get a huge settlement from Kevin and have the dude save his house, and also a settlement for the Native American who took the photo that he used to inspire his thing, his symbol for the bank. But of course, this pissed off Kim to no extent, because she felt betrayed by Saul because he went behind her back and did exactly what she told him not to do. And so that scene at the end, and this is part of the reason why I think, and I'll get more into this later, this is part of the reason why I think this is bar none the best season of the show, is because some of the acting, the scenes, and the show has always had good acting. I mean, I won't say that, but particularly from Kim, and this scene in particular is one of my favorite scenes. It's so super intense. The way that she's going after Saul for doing this, and heavily implying that she's going to break up with him. And we see that he's starting to freak out over this, like, no, don't do this. But then instead, she's like, either we split up, we go our separate ways, or we get married. Which is it's like a huge shocking moment. Like, really? You're going to marry him after doing that? But of course, she's selling it as not a romantic deal, but as a strictly legal arrangement to make it so that she has legal deniability for any of Saul's stunts that he may pull, that she can never be compelled to testify against him. And that was shocking. That was an absolute amazing way to end the episode. And then we also, on the Mike side of things, we see that he returned to working for Gus, and that Gus actually puts him in charge with dealing with Nacho, and he tries to convince Mike to, let him go, because he's like, look, Gus is not a good man. How can you work for him? He's got a gun to my father's head. And Mike, you can tell, is not okay with this, but I love Mike's reaction to it, where he's like, well, I told you not to fucking try to kill Hector. I told you there'd be consequences. I told you this. You didn't listen to me. And of course, that's not the response Nacho wanted at all. But it was still really interesting. But anyway, I love this episode. I thought it was amazing. So that leads to the next episode, JMM, and I do have to talk about something from the previous episode I forgot to mention, which of course is huge, that Lalo gets arrested due to Mike manipulating situations or witnesses, or giving them more information. Like, he doesn't lie, but he just gives people more information that will lead to Lalo's arrest. So he gets arrested in the previous episode, which was an intense scene. So here we see that they hire Saul to defend Lalo. Also, of course, building off of the previous episode, and again, this is, stories colliding, Saul and Kim get married. Just like they said they would, which was a nice little scene. I love Huel being there, and his reaction is like, you don't have rings, and and stuff like that. And it was nice, like, that it was like Kim and Saul really, even though they was like, this is just a legal arrangement, this is just legality, but you could tell that they were, more closer to each other because of this. But of course, the whole time he's getting married, someone's trying to call him, and of course it's Nacho trying to call him to go defend Lalo. And so when he goes to see Lalo offers him a shitload of money to get him out on bail, but he's like, it's impossible. There's no way I can get you out on bail. And then when he goes home to Kim, he kind of, at first he's feeling bad about this, and they have an agreement. Part of the agreement is that if he has a instinct not to tell her something, that he tells her. So he tells her that about Lalo, and how Lalo offered to be a friend of the cartel, which is a callback to Breaking Bad, because when we first meet Saul Goodman in the desert, where Walt and Jesse threaten to kill him, and he thinks it's the cartel. He keeps saying, "Oh, and amigo the cartel," is saying, "I'm a friend of the cartel." Over and over again. So we get that saying specifically here, as saying a friend of the cartel, implying that he's going to make a lot of money from them, and be like essentially a part of them, like a lawyer, cartel lawyer. And of course, Kim's like, do you want to be a friend of the cartel? He's like, no, of course not. It's never going to happen because he's never going to get bail anyway. But then Mike gets a hold of him. And I love the scene, of course, with Mike because Saul had asked for Mike's help with the Ackerman's situation. Mike's like, not interested. And so when Mike shows up asking for Saul, he's like, oh, not interested. And is like fucking around. But then Mike is right at his doorstep. But Mike tells, because Mike is now working with Gus to actually get Lalo out because Lalo ordered Nacho to blow up his restaurant, which of course they had to do because they wanted to play along again. They don't want to expose Nacho as a spy. So Lalo's causing just as many issues from jail as he did outside of jail. So I think they figured the best thing for him is to get him out of jail so he'd be forced to go down to Mexico where Gus can then take care of him. Because Gus made it clear that if Lalo died north of the border, that the cartel would automatically assume Gus was responsible. They didn't say anything about south of the border, though. It makes it look less like Gus. So that is now their ultimate goal, is to get Lalo back to Mexico, and the best way to do that is to get him on bail because they know that there's no way he's going to beat the murder charge. So if he gets out on bail, the first thing he'll do is flee. So Mike gives him some information about how he manipulated the witnesses gives that to Saul for him to use in order to get Lalo out on bail. So it's no longer an impossible task. It's now within Saul's grasp to do it, and so he does, and he sets up, he works his magic where he has this fake family come in pretending to be a family that Lalo's involved with, and that showing that he has ties to the community, so he's not going to leave, and he's able to use that to get Lalo off, or out on bail, or at least offer bail. But of course I'll get to that moment later. Although, wait, I think, yeah, it is this episode where they announced that he does have bail, but it's $7 million. And it was like, oh, I'm sorry, Lalo, I tried my best. And I was like, oh yeah, it's $7 million, sure, no worries. I can do that. But then, and so that was a very intense scene. I really love the way, like, freaking, God, I'm blanking on his name all of a sudden. Oh, how could I blank on his name? The actor who plays Saul Goodman. God, this is a brain fart of the worst magnitude. Bob Odenkirk. God damn it. Okay, so Bob Odenkirk, amazing performance, absolutely, because you can see how, he's working his magic, he loves doing it, he's enjoying it, but then he looks over to the victim of the family. He knows for a fact that he's helping a murderer get away with murder, and so he's looking at the victim of the murderer that he's helping to evade justice, and feeling that overwhelming guilt, which is something, of course, Saul Goodman of Breaking Bad wouldn't give a shit about. So we're yet to get that full transformation, but he's there, he's on his way, because he's doing it anyway. Like Jimmy McGill of season 1 and 2 would never even do it in the first place, but of course Lalo's dangled all this cash in front of him, so he's doing it, but he feels guilty about it. And the way that Bob Odenkirk in performance made it clear that this was the case, and every time he looks over to him and he's riddled with guilt, was so powerful, so good. But then, of course, you get the resolution to the storyline with Howard. And there was another part that I forgot to mention in the previous episode where Saul had hired prostitutes to go harass Howard and make it look like they were his prostitutes in front of all of his business friends at a business lunch, which was a funny scene. So anyway, Howard goes up to Saul in court and recognizes, he knows for a fact that it was Saul who did it, who sent the prostitutes and the bowling balls. He's like, I think it's quite odd that someone who's offered a job will respond by doing shit like that and suggest that maybe he needs help. But of course, that's when Saul loses his shit and reveals why he was so offended by the job offer, because he feels like it's condescending, basically. That it's the Howard's so great and he's offering him a position, high position. Oh, you come work for me, and he is like beyond that now, and he has a total different perspective, which builds off of what we saw in the season 4 finale about being a winner and showing those assholes who think you can do no good that you're better than them. And he's like, no, I am so much bigger than you. And that confrontation he had in the courthouse where he's like yelling at Howard and chasing him down, is like, I'm a god to you, you're an ant. Like, that was amazing. That was such a powerful performance. It was so good. So yeah, I really love this episode as well. Alright, so then we get into the next episode, Bagman. Now, I do like this episode. I did get some shit for this episode when I first reviewed it as well, because I don't think it's the bee's knees. A lot of people I saw called this the best episode of the show. I don't agree. I do really like this episode, as I keep saying that, but I don't like it as much as apparently a lot of other people did. Because to me, it does seem a bit out of character for Better Call Saul. It's funny because they got Vince Gilligan to direct it, and it does feel more like a Breaking Bad episode. Now, Vince Gilligan did help create Better Call Saul, but he basically turned over showrunning duties to, Elliot Gould, that's his name. So Elliot Gould is basically the Better Call Saul guy, and Vince Gilligan more the Breaking Bad guy. So when they bring Vince Gilligan back to direct the episode, I think they did it on purpose because it's had more of a Breaking Bad type feeling to it. And so it feels a little bit out of place in the Better Call Saul universe, and more that the issues I had with it is that I find the wandering in the desert, being alone, and all the prolonged scenes that show how desperate the situation is. He's having to drink his own pee, and his conversations with Mike. I actually thought that would drag, and honestly, and even though this is going to piss a lot of people off, if I had to point to any part in the entire season of this entire season that felt like filler, it would be in this episode. Which, I'm sorry, it's true, because some of the moments where they were wandering through the desert seemed to drag for me and seemed more of an indulgence. But that's not the entire episode. The entire episode did not feel like filler. It's just like a couple of scenes that I felt dragged a bit too much. But as I said, I actually still love the episode overall, because the episode begins with Lalo convincing Saul to go pick up the money, and god damn was that scene so good. That scene was so good. Again, amazing acting from Bob Odenkirk, because at first he was like, can't you find someone else? He's like, okay, fine, I'll find someone else. And he's about to walk out that door and just blurts out a number, like $100,000. And Lalo's like, what, that's what you want me to pay you? Okay, sure. And again, this kind of feels like Lalo was playing Saul in this case. I think he has Saul's number. He knows he's all about money. And even though he protests and pretends that he's not, he knows that's his driving force. And so Lalo pretends to, okay, I'll just get someone else to do it. That's fine. But he knows for a fact that he's not going to walk out of that room. And so he kind of played Saul, and I love that. That's an amazing dynamic. And another absolutely amazing scene in this episode is when Saul tells Kim about this, because he has this, honest, open policy with her, and how she freaks out. And this is amazing acting on Rhea Seehorn's part, who plays, I'm probably mispronouncing it right, but who plays Kim. She has a lot of amazing acting moments, and that scene where she is begging him not to go, that felt like one of the most genuinely emotionally powerful scenes in the entire show, at least as far as Kim's concerned. I felt like a true moment of like true panic and showed like true love for Saul and concern of his life. God, it was a really touching moment. It was really powerful. And then you had the moments, the action sequences were super freaking intense when Saul was ambushed by the Colombian gang. And god damn, the whole way it was filmed. Again, this is a benefit of getting Vince Gilligan to direct the episode. The whole way it was filmed, and the whole way it was shot and edited, and the music, like, and acted, of course, like, really helped intensify the suspense. And that you really thought Saul was going to die, but then, of course, Mike shows up, and that was also intense how the sniper rifle just randomly starts killing these people. It was such a great scene, so intense. So, yes, I actually do like this episode a lot. I think all that stuff was, like, top-notch, really worked for me. But as I said, the desert stuff dragged on a little bit too much for me. But it was still satisfying towards the end when they finally got the guy. It's just like once they got to the desert, that's when the episode started dragging. But before that, I thought this episode was like top notch. So I still overall, I still really like this episode, and I still say it's one of the better episodes of the show. Just maybe not top tier for me, and definitely not the best as some people claimed it to be. Anyway, we'll get to the episode Bad Choice Road. Which honestly, I'm going to have to say, I think, so far at least, up to what has aired so far, up to the end of season 5, this is my favorite episode of the show. And so depending on what season 6 throws at us, I don't know, maybe it could remain what I think the best episode of the show is. But it's definitely, out of the first 5 seasons, I think it's the best episode of the show. This episode, to me, was pure gold. So, the scene that starts this episode is just so amazing. Every time I watch it, like I watched it like twice within the past couple days, and each time I cried. The first time I watched this, I cried. When I watched it the second time, I cried. I watched it again. Like, it doesn't matter how many times I watch this scene, I cry because it's just that powerful. So it has that split scene between Saul and Kim, something that they've done a lot throughout the show, where they show, and they've done this before the show, how alienated and distant they are from each other. But here they show it, they're pretty much in sync. Like, they're actually physically distant, because in the other ones where they were emotionally distant, they were actually standing right next to each other in a physical term, but they were emotionally distant, where here we get the opposite, where they are physically distant but emotionally connected, because they're basically doing the same actions, and they have like the symmetry in this is fucking beautiful. And I didn't notice this again until I just did the rewatch, because, as I said, watching all it together, I remember previous seasons better than something I've seen like 3 or 4 years ago. And I didn't realize that this was actually the same song that they used in all of the montages where they had the split screen between Kim and Jimmy. But this time it was like a humming version of the song rather than using lyrics. And it was beautiful. Like, it showed how broken up they both were, but how Kim thought that Jimmy was dead, so she was more emotionally damaged. But Jimmy, well, he knew he was alive, but he was physically damaged because he was dehydrated, having to drink his OP, having to carry these huge bags throughout the desert, and he's, sunburned to high hell. And having the contrast of her in this luxury, like getting to get water from the sink where he has to drink pee and stuff like that, but she's more affected, or they're at least the same affected, was absolutely amazing. But then the montage ends and I'm almost coming to tears just talking about it, but then the montage ends with Saul looking at his phone and getting reception, and then calling Kim. And just the simple look on her face where she picks up her phone and she sees that it's from him. And just the look of utter relief. And then she picks up the phone and asks Jimmy. And then he replies, yes, it's me. I'm okay. And then her utter, going into tears, crying, her main relief. Yeah, as I said, I'm almost crying just talking about it. Always brings me to tears. I think it is the singular most emotionally effective scene in the entire show. And I even put it up there with stuff in Breaking Bad. It was such a beautiful scene. I cannot say enough good things about it. But anyway, then we get into the rest of the episode where Saul gets picked up by Gus's men, because Mike calls them, and they come up with this story to explain what happened to Saul, because they don't want Lalo to know that what happened to Saul, because they don't want him to know that someone was trying to kill him, and they don't want him to know that someone came and saved Saul, because they would be like, well, who was that? Why did they do it? And eventually you'd figure out that it was Gus doing it because he wants him to go back to Mexico. Anyway, they'd rather him not know all these things, so they feed Saul this other story that his car broke down and he didn't want to hitchhike because he had all that money and was afraid of, what a hitchhiker might do to him with all that money out in the middle of nowhere, which is a very feasible story. It makes a lot of sense. And Lalo does appear to buy it at first. And then, of course, you have, because Kim had visited Lalo when she was terrified that Jimmy might be dead and wanted to know any information about him. And so Lalo brings that up. He's like, oh, I met your wife, by the way. Ooh, what a looker of respect. I love that he had that attitude where Saul was just mortified, of course, that she was involved. Because then Mike had a line in the previous episode about how, because he told her about it, that she's in the game. And he's like, no, she's not in the game. But having learned that she visited Lalo makes it even more terrified for her that she's in the game. And he even says outright, you're not in the game, I'm in the game. She's like, what are you talking about? But also this episode's amazing in terms of dealing with the PTSD that Saul's going through. It's one of the best and purest depictions of PTSD in fiction ever. Because it really puts you in his mindset, particularly the scene where all Kim is doing is, juicing some orange. And they don't even, a lesser show or a lesser movie would rely on actually blending visuals of blood and guts with the visuals of Kim juicing the orange to get across the point that that's what it's triggering him, that he's relating this juicing of the orange with the blood and the horror that he just experienced. And so I feel like, a typical movie, a typical film, maybe even a good one, not even necessarily bad ones, but definitely lesser, would rely on that. And I love how they don't. How they don't show any other images other than Kim juicing oranges, but they film it in such a way, and they do add sound effects, to be fair, but they film it in such a way to make it clear that that's what he's relating it to. The way they use the editing, the way they use sound, the way they use the close-up pictures of the juice coming out, and then to the point where you can see the reaction on Saul's face that he's getting traumatized by this and is bringing back the memories that horror he just experienced, and to the point where Kim gets the juice spills all over her shirt, where he freaks the fuck out and throws his shit down. Now, I feel like a lesser film would have just filmed that normally, or maybe, as I said, showed the images of the blood he just experienced and the carnage he experienced and blended it. And so you would see it from Kim's perspective or something, where it seemed like Jimmy just freaked out for no reason, but you would intellectually understand that he has PTSD. But here, you more than just intellectually understand that. You experience it with him. You experience just through the images of the juicing of the orange how he's affected by it. And again, that's truly amazing. And so then he's so traumatized, and then this is why I think this is the best episode of the show, because it has this strong emotional drama that the show does so well, but it also has some humor, and it has what I think might be one of the funniest scenes in the entire show. Even though it's at Saul's expense, who is just traumatized from this experience, and it's kind of using his PTSD to inject this humor. But as I said, I love Bill Oakley. He's hilarious. He's one of my favorite characters. The prosecutor, and I love that we don't actually see them in court together. The case where we just see the aftermath of it, where Bill is like taunting the fuck out of Saul. It's like, wow, you really screwed that one up. You took, an easy victory and you just snatched it into defeat or something. He kept like taunting him. I was like, kids will be studying this for years on what not to do. And really giving him so much shit, and you can tell like Saul's just traumatized and trying to get away, so he goes in the stairwell to hide. And then we see Bill Oakley sticking his head in and is like, oh, don't worry, I haven't lost respect for you, you're still a lawyer. I love that scene so much. But then Saul goes to Mike for some understanding and comfort, because he can see that Mike has experienced this kind of thing and thought he might have some wisdom. So Mike gives him the story of the bad choice road. I don't think he phrases it like that. I think Saul eschews his analogy later on in the episode and uses the term bad choice road, but he talks about a road that you're on, and this is what you need to get from there to there, and that eventually it will fade. And I love how Saul's course is not satisfied with this at first, and it's just like, well, it sucks that you're the only one on this earth that I have to talk to about this. And then Kim, also affected by the recent experience of almost having lost Saul, quits. I can never pronounce that correctly, but anyway, Rich's firm. She quits it, and of course, because she wants her experience was different than Saul's. Her experience it made her realize what was important in life, and that life is short, and she shouldn't be wasting it working for people that she doesn't appreciate and doesn't like, and wants to full-time do her pro bono work. Which, of course, does not sit well with Saul at all. And he starts freaking out when she tells him this, and she tries to say, look, this is none of your damn business. This is what I want to do with my life, and you can, because from his sensibility, she's doing the exact opposite of what his life is driven. His life is driven about becoming a winner, making the most money, and she's just throwing away what's going to make her a winner for pro bono work, which isn't going to do shit for her. And then that's when he tries to bring up the analogy of the bad choice road, which again was also funny that he kind of really fumbled that metaphor. But then you get the scene where Lalo shows up, because Lalo went out to he was going to go to Mexico, so he went to the same spot that Saul was at, and he noticed that there was no car, and he went looking for Saul's car, and Saul in the ditch shot up, so that seemed to conflict with his story that he simply broke down, so he gets suspicious, so he goes back and he interrogates, and this was one of the most intense scenes in the entire show. I gotta say, it is up there with the best of Breaking Bad. It's where Lalo just keeps interrogating Saul, makes him repeat the same story over and over again. And then you have Mike is sitting outside the roof with a sniper rifle ready to take him out, which adds to the tension a lot, until finally Kim confronts Lalo and yells at him, which is so risky. Like, I remember my heart was like beating out of my chest when I was watching this scene. It was that intense. And then she stands in the way of Mike's shot with his sniper rifle, and the whole time I was like, oh my god, he's gonna kill Kim, what the hell's gonna happen? It was like such an intense scene, and the way it was acted again was absolutely beautiful, absolutely amazing. Like, this is like the best of the best kind of storytelling that we have. But, you know, it does convince Lalo. And I actually think, because Kim's, you know, speech to Lalo was about how he needs to get his house in order, because if he has to rely on some lawyer to do his dirty work for him, that means that he can't trust his own people. And ironically enough, she's absolutely correct. And in fact, I think she hits a nerve with him because of that. And that's what lets him leave. And then he realizes that he needs to trust Nacho more, which I think is what motivates him to take Nacho with him to Mexico in order to get Nacho promoted, because he's like, I need to rely on my own men. I need to have men around me that I trust more. So if I elevate him and I support him, then he'll be more loyal to me. Of course, little does he know Nacho's already a spy, which he will know by the end of the next episode. But of course, at this point, he doesn't. So, God, yeah. And that was just, I cannot say enough good things about that scene. It was just absolutely pure gold. Anyway, let me go ahead and get into the finale, the final episode of the season. That's Something Unforgivable, which begins with the aftermath of the scene where Kim confronted Lalo, and that's when Saul finally confesses to her that he was, you know, shot and attacked because he was lying about it this whole time. And I love, in the previous episode, there was a scene where Kim's like, you can tell me, like, I can know there's more to it, because she saw there was a bullet hole in the coffee cup, and she tries it, and he won't do it, and you can tell that she's a bit disappointed in him for that. But here he finally does confess to her, and they go to like a rich hotel to hide out because they're scared of Lalo. But Saul just wants to relax in the spa and get room service, but it's obvious that Kim catches on, because he keeps pushing that, and Kim catches on to the fact that he's scared for her safety, and that's why he doesn't want her to leave. But it's funny, because she's like, no, I have a responsibility to my clients. But we see her is in court. She actually deals with their clients like right away, and she finds an excuse to stay longer. Now, I don't necessarily think that's because she wants to stay away from Saul. I think that's because, like, the more guilty she feels, and she's feeling guilty of the Lalo stuff, the more good she wants to do. It motivates her even more to try to find more pro bono cases, more people she can help. And she has this dichotomy of doing bad things but relieving her guilt by helping people with pro bono work. And it's funny, because Ackerman actually called her out on this earlier in this season, straight to her face. Well, I bet you do all this kitchen soup work and help it out to make yourself feel better about all the bad stuff you do, which is, he hit the nail on the head. It's exactly what she's doing. But then Howard, of course, runs into her and tells her, you know, when he hears that she quit, he thinks Jimmy was involved. Of course, she's being arrogant because Jimmy had nothing to do with it. Well, indirectly, Jimmy's experience had something to do with it, but in actual fact, Jimmy doesn't want her to quit and is upset that she did quit, which is the opposite of what Howard thinks. And so Howard tells her about the bowling balls and the prostitutes, and she just starts laughing and thinks it's funny. Meanwhile, Saul goes to Mike because he's freaking out. He wants assurances that Kim is safe, and so he bangs on Mike's door. He makes a ruckus and pisses Mike off, and eventually Mike just he's like, oh, you want information you can't have. But eventually he tells him, because he sees how much this is breaking him up inside and how he's falling apart. Eventually he's like, look, I can tell you that Lalo won't be a problem after tonight. So it pretty much confirms that he's going to be killed. And so that does make him feel better. And later Saul goes and tells Kim about this as well, makes her feel better. But they stay in the nice hotel and have like the room service that he wanted to have. They have a really nice meal. And that's when Kim tells him that she had found out what he did to Howard. And at first he was thinking that, that's just going to piss her off. But instead, she likes it. She laughs about it. And they start doing their joking thing when he coming up with ways to get back at Howard. And, they have sex because it really, that kind of talk really excites Kim, as I talked about earlier. And they keep talking. I had the pillow talk, and they keep talking about the shit they can do to Howard, where eventually Kim brings up the possibility of completely destroying and discrediting him in order for the Sandpiper case to finish, so they can get the payout. And and then they're having dinner, and she brings it up again, but Saul's like, "Look, you're just joking. That was just joking, right? We're just playing around. We're not actually gonna destroy it, Howard, like that." But she's like, no, he'll be fine. He'll bounce back. And then she does that sort of gun motion, saying how she is deadly serious. Now, it is interesting because that this is how they're portraying Kim, because she does have that dichotomy, because when she's talking about what she would do with the Sandpiper money, she's talking about like using it to make her pro bono work full time, to provide the kind of services that usually clients can only get if they have a lot of money. So her goal is to like have this huge, and not having to worry about money, so she doesn't have to work another job, doesn't have to do a Mercer Verde thing again, that she can full time help people and help them really well without having to worry about financial issues. So her ultimate goal is altruistic, is to help people, but how she wants to accomplish this is completely immoral, and is by destroying someone's life. And I don't think she sees it that way, because I think she is so upset and hates Howard so much that she doesn't even see it as such a bad thing as destroying his life. But really that is. So there's a dichotomy in her now, where part of her wants to do, and it's like the thing that Ackerman, or I keep messing up his name, but that dude, the bald dude, it's the thing that he explained earlier, but to an extreme, where she wants to go out and do something absolutely horrific and horrible, but in order to do something else that is giving back to the community, that's really powerfully helping people. So it's the economy of doing both things, and seem to be taking to the extreme here, which surprises and shocks even Saul. So that's a very good cliffhanger for that storyline. I'm still curious to see where they're going to take it in the next season. But then we get into the Nacho and Lalo stuff, which was super, super, super intense this episode, because Nacho's down in Mexico, and he has a meeting with Don Alardio, and sort of Lalo coaches him on how to deal with them, and he manages to impress him. Meanwhile, like, Lalo turns up his ass kissing to Don Alardio to 1,000, because he knows that's the best way to sever ties with Gus, is to impress him even more and say, I'm so much better than Gus. So he brings him a car, he brings him all this, and you can tell that Juan Bolsa knows what he's doing, is not impressed by it. Because, I forgot to mention also that it was discovered that the Colombian gang that attacked, tried to kill Saul, was hired by Juan Bolsa, because his whole goal was to keep Lalo in prison, not realizing that it's actually going against Gus's interest, because he knows that Lalo was trying to sabotage Gus's business and wants to stop to it, because that's how they make their money. But he didn't realize that his actions were actually going against Gus's plans. But anyway, so you have that, but you know that Gus intends to assassinate Lalo, and so when he learns that Nacho's there, he says, oh, maybe we can use this to our advantage, and so he has someone call Nacho and say, look, leave the gate open, whatever, and that puts Nacho in such a precarious situation, because he's like, look, there's women and children here, there's good men, you have nothing to do with anything, you're not going to harm them, right? And they just ignore him, because obviously they don't give a shit about them, and as we see later in the episode, most of them do get killed, and even though Nacho is very much against it, but at this point he doesn't have a choice. He just has to go along with them or get killed himself. So he goes along with it and walks out. But the scene where like Lalo was up when he tried to make his escape was such an intense scene. It was such a good scene. And then of course we got the intense fight sequence when the assassins came to kill Lalo, but Lalo was able to outwit them and get the better of them. And then that scene where we see Lalo storming off after seeing all the innocent women and children that he loves get killed, and he realizes that Nacho had betrayed him and was working with the assassins. Just how furious he is. Oh my god, couldn't have a better cliffhanger for the season. It's just so can't wait until season 6 to come out. This episode was so good. It's another absolutely amazing episode. So those are the episodes of season 5 of Better Call Saul. So as I normally do, I have to name my favorite and my least favorite episode of the season. Least favorite is hard because there are no bad episodes this season. Like, I liked every episode this season, but I guess Feet to the Fire, if I had to choose the weakest episode of the season, I guess I would have to go with 50% Off. Because that was probably the slowest, even though I don't think it was that slow, but the stuff with the people going 50% off, like, that was a bit of indulgence. So like I didn't as I said, I didn't buy that they would do that. And most of the other scenes were just set up for the next episode, which again, nothing wrong with this. It's actually a good episode, but compared to the others, it's probably the weakest. And best episode, God. See, that is a bit harder because there's so many great episodes. I think almost every other episode is great. The guy for this, Dedicated Max, but then you get even better episodes like Wexler versus Goodman or JMN or Bagman, all good episodes. But the runner-up that almost gets it, of course, is Something Unforgivable, the finale. But of course, for best episode of the season, I'm definitely going to go with Bad Choice Road, which, as I mentioned, I think is probably the best episode of the entire show thus far. It just showcased everything about the show, turned everything up to an 11. The comedy, the suspense, the drama, the emotional impact, the character stories, the everything was just so good. It had some of the best acting, writing that the show has ever done. It really makes it stand out as an absolutely amazing episode. So my rating for Better Call Saul Season 5 as a whole, I'm going to give this a 10, the best. If you watch my channel, you might have noticed that when this season first came out, I gave it a 9, but watching all 5 seasons of Better Call Saul back to back, as I said, made it clear that this was clearly better than the others. And even though it's not a perfect season, but there's no such thing as a perfect season. So when I say 10, I'm not saying it's a perfect season. Comparatively speaking, as far as is as good as in the top tier of any season of television can be. It's as I said, like, even though it was a bit slow at the start, it never dragged. There was never really any filler in it, and it was always like top-notch production, storytelling, acting. All that was like turned up to an 11. So yeah, I'm gonna give Better Call Saul Season 5 a 10 out of 10. So that's it for my episode-by-episode review of Season 5 of Better Call Saul, and that is it for now for my episode-by-episode reviews of Better Call Saul, period, because I've now reached the last season to air. So I'm going to have to wait for season 6. Now, when season 6 first comes out, of course, I'm going to review it week to week as I normally do. So probably a year after that, because I want to give some time for the season to sit with me, I'll come back and do my episode by episode review, and then I'll wrap up my coverage of Better Call Saul by doing the top 30 best episodes. I probably won't do a top worst episode, because like Breaking Bad, there's just not many bad episodes. It's so good. In fact, Breaking Bad had a clear terrible episode, where Better Call Saul doesn't even have that. They just have some, kind of boring filler episodes, but they're not terrible. They're not bad. So no point in doing a worst episode list for Better Call Saul. I might do another video to celebrate Better Call Saul, but I'll definitely do like a top 30 or 40 or something like that. But as I said, I'm going to have to wait until a year after season 6 airs before I do that. But yeah, so I'll have to put this on hold for a bit, but it was great going through this series again to prep myself. I am glad I did this before season 6 aired, because now I feel like I don't know when it's going to air exactly. They say sometime in 2022, so hopefully it's not too far away, but I'll be more sort of locked and loaded and ready to put season 6 in the greater context of the show. So I am glad I went through this now, even though the show's not done yet, which is the first time I've done a series like this where the show was still airing. But yeah, so I'll put that on hold. So next month, I will be covering Star Trek The Original Series. Will be my next episode by episode, my season review, where I cover every episode of the show one season at a time. It is the only Star Trek show I've yet to do. I honestly been kind of putting it off because it's kind of, I don't know if I'd say it's my least favorite Star Trek show. I think that's Enterprise, but I'd never been that big of a fan of the original series, and it's really outdated. It is hard to watch a show that's so old and out of date, and try to evaluate it seriously. But no, I'm gonna do it. I'm finally gonna do it. So I'm a completionist. I've done every other Star Trek show, so I need to do the original series, so I am going to start that next month. And I also think I'm going to cover the animated series as part of that coverage, because I kind of see that as an extension of the original series. But anyway, so you can check my channel out for that. Also check me out as I cover many other shows like Lower Decks, many other Star Trek shows, The Expanse, Star Wars Clone Wars, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.